everyone, I'm here today with a little video about my tarot pet peeves. So these are just my opinions. These are my, I guess you could call them unpopular opinions. I'm not necessarily saying anyone has to agree with them. They're totally my own. And if you disagree, you can put in the comments below. As long as it's polite and respectful, that's fine. But yeah, let's get into my top 5 tarot pet peeves. So number 1 is matte cardstock. Now, if you've been on this channel, you've been watching it for a while, you know I don't like matte cardstock. Everybody else seems to just love it and rave about it. And some people are buying editions of decks they already have that are now being printed in matte. And I do not like matte cardstock. So one of my most recent purchases is the Secret Oracle by Raven Felon. It's beautiful artwork, by the way. But I cannot stand the cardstock. I find it difficult to work with. So it doesn't fan, it clumps together, it's hard to pick up. It looks great on camera for photographing because you don't necessarily get that glare you get with a glossy cardstock. But to actually work with it, to do readings with it, I don't like it. Like I pick it up, I feel like there's 2 cards in one. Often they do clump together, so you have to separate them. They don't fan out nicely. I don't like it. I find it hard to work with, like physically hard to work with. Yes, I also find the colors, I mean, this is a beautiful, colorful deck, but I find when there's like a little bit of that gloss, the colors just pop so much more. So I am not a fan of matte cardstock. I'm really hoping that this trend eventually goes away. I really like, to be honest, I like this cardstock. This is the Llewellyn Hedgewich Botanical Oracle, which is Llewellyn is the publisher. It's thinner, it has a gloss to it. And while, you get that reflection from the ring light and stuff, you know what? It's actually easier to work with. It fans out so much easier. It shuffles easier. It's easier to pick up. It's just easier for me to work with. So in real life, I find that the colors, I feel like they just pop more. So I'm not a fan of matte cardstock. Number 2, my second pet peeve is when people say, you don't need to learn the meanings of the tarot cards. You can just read it purely intuitively. Then you're not really reading tarot. Tarot cards have specific meanings to them. There's a specific system. It is 22 major arcana. You then have 4 suits with 14 cards each. You have certain court cards, and they all have specific meanings to them. Now, that doesn't mean you can't bring your intuition into a reading. I certainly do that all the time when I read for people, because there's the card meanings, but also my intuition will kick in about certain things. So definitely, it's not about not using your intuition, but the cards do have specific meanings. And I think people often want a shortcut. They want a shortcut. They see the tarot, they want to read with it, which is great. But instead of taking that time to learn, and everybody learns differently, and there's different methods of learning, they just want to cut right to the chase to not have to go through all of that. And it is a specific system with specific meanings. You know, if you don't want to learn 78 card meanings or 156 if you read reversals, then you know what, there's oracle cards with keywords on them. There's also tarot decks with keywords on them to help you out too, which is great. Also, if you want to read purely intuitively, there's great cards out there like the soul cards. But if you want to read tarot, there are specific meanings to them. And I think that, like if you want to work with the system, you have to learn it. And it's like with astrology, you can't just intuitively read a birth chart. You have to know what those symbols and placements mean. It doesn't mean you can't bring intuition in, but you do have to have a basic foundation first to jump off of. The third pet peeve that I have is when people change up the court system. Now, I know this is probably going to be a pretty unpopular opinion, but I like to know who is who. I want the king to be the king, the queen to be the queen, the knight, or you can call the prince, the page, the princess to be, because I want to know who they are, because again, they have specific meanings to them. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't, if somebody puts like a female as the king or a guy as the queen, no, that doesn't bother me. It's about knowing who is who. But then I see people switch things up, like they'll have like a seeker and a weaver, and they'll have like some name that I'm just like, I don't know who is who. And like there's some that are easily translatable. Like if you have like daughter, son, and you have like mother, father, that's pretty easy to translate, right? But I've seen it where people have, like, they'll have the gatherer and they'll have like the nurturer, like all these things where I'm like, who is who? Please tell me. Please tell me who is who, because I am getting mixed up. I find I get that too as well when people change up the suits. Now, again, you know, we see, especially with more traditional tarot, you could have wands or batons or pentacles or coins. That doesn't bother me. It's when you get into things like we have scissors and seashells and cupcakes, and like I'm like, okay, which one is which one? Please tell me which one is which one. I find that just annoying for me personally, and I do have decks like that, and I have worked with them and can work with them. I'm just saying it's my pet peeve. Maybe I'm more of a traditional tarot deck kind of girl. I like to know which suit is which person is which in which court card. I want to know who is who. That's just me. My fourth pet peeve is when it's just all of the tarot misinformation that's going around. Now, I think this seems to be more of a TikTok thing, to be honest, than a YouTube thing, although I have seen some of it on YouTube, but I do see it more on TikTok. I've heard that tarot's a closed practice, that you can't practice it unless you're of Romani heritage. The Romani invented the tarot. I've heard it is pictures from, mystical books from the Library of Alexandria in Egypt that were passed down to the Romani people. All of that stuff is just not true. Now, and this is no disrespect to anybody of Romani heritage, like at all. It's just facts are facts. Like, it is a Northern Italian card game. The earliest deck we have is from the 1460s. There's some evidence that it might have been in use a little bit before that, but basically it's a medieval card game. It was a medieval card game that spread throughout Europe, and it reflected like the court society of the day and the various levels of society. That's why the major arcana has like all like the ruling class and the priestly class in it. And then you have like the swords are the military, which also includes the nobility. We have the cups, which are the clerics. We have the wands, which are like the peasants. And then you have the coins, which are like the merchants. And that's how medieval society was. And it started out as just like a card game to play. And then over time, people started to use it, particularly in the 1700s and into the 1800s, in more like parlor games of fortune telling. And then you get into like the 1900s. And you get into later, you get like the Rider-Waite-Smith has all these esoteric layers put onto it. That's because in the 19th century, people started to think it had this mystical importance. Some people were like, oh, it's the lost, images from the Library of Alexandria. That's where you get that myth from. But it's totally a myth. It has nothing to do with the Library of Alexandria at all. And that's where you get kind of these more esoteric layers being let onto it. So there's just like so much misinformation that's going around. And I mean, this is easily Googled history. Like anybody can look this stuff up. But you have people telling people you can't practice the tarot. And it just is so annoying that people are just spreading this misinformation around. To put it into perspective, the Library of Alexandria was first burned, I think it's 43 BC with Julius Caesar. There was a later burning in the 3rd century. That's the more famous one. But, the tarot doesn't emerge to over 1,000 years later. Like there just isn't that connection there as much as people would like there to be, and as much as those myths and those legends sound really tantalizing. They're just not real. Like facts are facts, right? So I really hate when misinformation goes around. I think it's really misleading, and it also turns people away from reading the tarot. We have so many people claiming that all sorts of things, they're closed practices that just aren't, and it's turning people away. And I find that really annoys me. I think it's really sad that we have people who are like, oh no, I really want to learn the tarot, but somebody on TikTok told me I couldn't. Like, come on, people. And that leads me to my fifth pet peeve is another trend I see on TikTok, not so much again here on YouTube, is people bashing historical decks. So for example, we have our Rider-Waite-Smith deck. I'm just going to grab my little Rider-Waite-Smith in a tin that I love. I've seen people saying, don't read tarot cards that are made before 2000 because they're all white and they're racist. Don't read the Rider-Waite-Smith, it's racist. Don't read the Marseille, it's racist because there's all white people in it. Okay, first of all, when we're looking at historical decks like the Visconti Tarot, which is the one I'm talking about from the 1400s, as well as the Marseille deck, which emerged in, I think it's the 15 or 1600s, it was reflecting European society at the time. So I don't understand why people are angry that there are European people in a European card game. Like, that was the world they saw around them. And I really hate when people judge historical periods by the time we live in now. Because guess what? 50 years from now, people are going to judge us and be like, oh my God, I can't believe they did that. I mean, even in my lifetime, I've seen the Moors change, right? Like, we all have. So I think it's unfair to judge people in the past by the way things are now. And to be clear, I think it's great we have so many diverse decks now. I mean, it is a fair criticism that for too long we had the phrase tarot so white, right? Like, all the card decks, featured like white people and thin people and heteronormative and all that kind of stuff, right? But that doesn't mean that being white or heteronormative is bad. It's just, if that's the only voice in the room, that's a problem. And we don't live in a homogenous society. We live in a diverse society. So it makes sense that decks are becoming more and more diverse. And the credit for that goes, I think, to independent deck creators, because people were asking for this and the publishers, let's be honest, weren't really listening. And then people started to bring out more and more decks from more and more diverse authors with more and more diverse people in them. And people just like people bought them. And then publishers woke up and said, hey, people really want this, right? So what the pet peeve isn't diversity in decks, because that's a good thing, but is when people like bash older decks and, kind of judge things based on, how things are today. And when this was published in, was it 1908, 1909? It was a different world. It was a different world. And also too, again, with A.E. Waite and the Golden Dawn and all of them that were putting out, these images, they were trying to make this esoteric deck, and they were trying to look back to, some of the older tarot decks as well and incorporate some of those imagery. So it is based on that European, medieval society. We still see that in these decks and sort of romanticizing medievalism, which they did at that time. And also, they lived in a different world than we lived in. But this still has meaning. It's important to look at where the modern decks came from. You can agree or disagree with people in the past, but it is important, I think, to at least know where these came from instead of just throwing it in the garbage and saying it's all bad, So that's where I have issues with things. So anyway, that is my pet peeves. I would like to know, what are your pet peeves? Maybe slippery cardstock is your pet peeve. I don't know. Do you agree or disagree with me? What are your thoughts about it? I would love to hear. Again, if it's respectful, I'll leave it. If not, then, obviously anybody that swears or whatever, I'm going to, or leaves mean comments, I'm going to delete from my channel. But respectful disagreement is totally okay. Just a heads up on my Patreon for the month of March. I'm still learning. I'm still teaching the runes. So if you want to come and join, you definitely can. You can check out my Etsy shop. I'm not sure what I'm going to feature for my readings for March, but I will let you know. But anyway, thank you so much for watching. You guys are the best. Oh, so I drop things. And thank you to my patrons too. You guys are awesome. And as always, peace and love and love.